Introduce yourself with your name and your role in this production.
My name is Xavier Reichbaum, and I am the writer and director of The Coldest Serving.
Do you think you could give us a synopsis of the film?
Yes, this film tells the story of a young woman named Beth, who, 1 year after the tragic loss of her sister, seeks revenge on those who she deems responsible.
So you handpicked every single person involved in this production. How did you know who belonged where?
When I'm writing scripts, especially with the limited resources that I have, I tend to write characters with certain actors and actresses already in mind. A lot of the things that I write, certain characters are tailored to actors and actresses that I'm already familiar with, whether that be because I've worked with them on a previous production or I've seen their work in other productions, sort of admiring from afar, that kind of thing. But it definitely helps because being down here and being very involved in the theater scene down here, I have met a lot of really talented actors and actresses through high school theater, college theater, and community theater down here. It really wasn't hard at all, actually, to find people to cast in these roles because I'm familiar with so much of their work, and I kind of just knew when I started pondering who I would cast in these roles, like, yep, that person, because I've already seen performances from them that confirmed to me that they would do the characters justice.
What's it like having to direct this cast given the heavy nature of the film? Were there any scenes in particular where it was hard to communicate the emotions that were needed?
There were definitely some scenes where it was difficult to communicate exactly not only what the character is supposed to be feeling, but what I would want the audience to be feeling specifically in some of those scenes. There's sort of this like unwritten rule of directing where you're never supposed to tell an actor to portray a certain emotion. Like, you're not supposed to just say be sad here or be angry here or be remorseful here. Like, you're not supposed to do that because it really doesn't give the actor much to work with. So I instead sort of had to resort to talking about some of the real life experiences that inspired the film, and if I was going to say, like, you know, this character is feeling regret in this moment or this character is feeling anger in this moment, rather than just saying that, I sort of analyzed my own script to the performer and sort of just like broke it down a bit more, like elaborated on it, got more specific, talked about the specific context of the story that would cause the character to feel a certain emotion. It was definitely difficult, but at the end of the day, I think I was able to communicate my vision well enough for the actors to really give it their all.
Did you take any measures to make sure the cast felt safe on set, given the dark and heavy nature of the film?
Honestly, the thematic content of the film and how dark it is and the different subject matters it's dealing with was actually the least of our concerns when we were making it in regards to the actors feeling safe and protected on set. The thing that really screwed us over was actually just the environment we were filming in, because we shot this movie in South Mississippi, like coastal Mississippi, in the middle of summer. And so it was more so figuring out practical ways to make sure everybody felt safe physically doing a lot of these things. Nobody really seemed to have trouble with any of the dark subject matter. And I honestly think that's a generational thing. You know, our generation has seen basically everything a human being can be exposed to in the form of video or photo or anything like that. So as far as the safety goes, the emotional stuff really had nothing to do with it. It was more so like making sure we constantly had water on set. We had a spray bottle filled with cold water that we could spray people with in between takes to make sure that they wouldn't overheat. And even that wasn't as effective as we would have liked it to be. And, you know, so we had to use fans sometimes as well. Just take breaks for people to breathe and things like that.
Did you always want to shoot on the Gulf Coast?
It was kind of my only option because I can't really afford to move an entire cast and crew of people to a different city to shoot a film over the course of like 2 or 3 consecutive weeks, like filming every single day. So I live on the Gulf Coast. Everybody who worked on the film lives on the Gulf Coast. So it was kind of just the most practical option. But I also think the Gulf Coast is a great place to film stuff, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, because there's just so many really scenic, really beautiful locations here, and we definitely made sure to utilize a lot of them in this film.
You wrote and directed a stage version of this script a couple years ago. Tell me about that. Was it a play when you first wrote it, or was it always meant to be a film?
It was always meant to be a film, but at the time I had even fewer resources, and some of the things that were in the script I just wouldn't be able to do on camera because film is so much more up close and personal, and there's just certain things, especially on the budget that I was working with all those years ago, that I just wouldn't have been able to accomplish. And suspension of disbelief is higher in theater, so I decided to do a stage version of it, but it was always meant to be a film version. It was written initially as a film, and then when I realized my only option at the time would be to adapt it for the stage, I basically just took the script that was formatted as a screenplay and reformatted it into a stage play. So it was literally one for one at the time. Like, there really weren't any changes between them.
This film was made on a shoestring budget of barely $500. How would having a bigger budget, say the classic $1 million typically associated with indie films, would have changed the film?
We definitely would have been able to afford certain pieces of equipment. We had the pieces of equipment that you would typically have on a professional film set, but because we had such a small budget, I was only able to get like the cheapest versions of those pieces of equipment, like a boom mic, for example, which we had like so much trouble with because it was a really cheap version of it. And if we had the classic like $1 million indie film budget, we definitely would have been able to afford some more state-of-the-art audio equipment, although we definitely were able to work with what we had and make it sound as good as we could. Obviously, would have been able to get a much more expensive camera. I initially had envisioned a lot of really crazy camera work for this movie, like these crazy like 360 spinning shots and things like that. You know, if we had a bigger budget, we would have been able to get like a 360 degree dolly track that we could just smoothly slide the camera around and things like that. So I think a bigger budget in general would have changed how the film moved, like visually, I think is like what the biggest difference would be. And then obviously some sound and things like that as well.
Would you consider remaking this film maybe 25 years down the line with a bigger budget? And what would that look like for you?
I actually have considered it. Even before I decided to make this version of the film, I was already telling myself, like, I'm gonna make this version just because this story has been festering inside my head for so long, and I feel like I just need to get it out. But yes, I definitely have been thinking about for a long time. Like I said, like even while I was like right before I was deciding to make this version of it, while I was in that pre-production process, thinking about remaking this down the line. I don't know about 25 years, because I also think that this would be good for a debut feature, which would also require me to go back and add in more stuff into the script to make it feature length. So as far as what it would look like for me, even though it's something I would definitely want to do, like conceptually, I don't think I actually will ever do that because I don't want the story to be longer than it needs to be, because it wasn't even originally written to be a feature film. It was always meant to be a short film, and so the story is as long as it needs to be. I feel like if I were to make a feature version of it however many years down the line, it would just feel overlong and like I'm padding the runtime. I'm someone who firmly believes movies should be as long as they need to be. They don't need to be longer than they need to be. They don't need to be shorter than they need to be. So even though it's something I would like to do, I don't think it's something I ever will do.
You wrote the first ever draft of this story when you were only 17. It's a pretty dark and depressing story. What inspired you to write it?
There were various real-life experiences from my life, my friends' lives, and certain family members of mine, their lives, that all sort of influenced this story. When I came up with the initial idea, I was admittedly in not a very good place, and I wrote the entire first draft of this in a single night. It all just sort of like poured out of me, and at the time it felt like various different sides of my own brain being personified into these characters and placed in a single room in a very tense situation and just fighting it out. And as far as like specific experiences go, obviously there's a lot of themes of depression and mental illness and suicide in the film and self-harm, and there wasn't a trigger warning at the beginning of this, so not to get too specific, but I have firsthand experience with every single one of those things, as do my friends, my circle in general, and a lot of my family members as well. So there wasn't like one specific thing that happened in my life that became this like dramatized version of it or something. It's really a whole array of things that I've experienced in my life, and stories that friends and family of mine have told me that sort of brought this story to the page.
How is this film different from the first draft that you wrote 3.5 years ago?
It's good. I would say that is the biggest difference. You know, it's a very common saying that artists are their own worst critics. Not even just artists, just like people in general are their own worst critics. And that's definitely true for me. I remember at the time when I wrote that first draft, I thought it was the best thing ever. Like, I was really jerking myself off there. Like, there were certain lines that I wrote where I was just like, oh, this is so good. I'm so good. And I think that headspace is what made the original version of it from about 3.5 years ago now. Wow. Not as good. The original version was also much shorter, whereas this version has a lot of added scenes, added dialogue. Pretty much all of the dialogue in this version is actually completely different from the stage version, which for all accounts and purposes would be the original draft. I reworked almost all of the dialogue because that 17-year-old dialogue that 17-year-old me was writing was just really bad and really cringy and never landed the way that I wanted it to, or the way that I thought it would. So I would say that's the biggest difference, honestly. Like, all the dialogue is reworked to make it a more sensitive and mature exploration of these very real themes that we're exploring with this story. And also there's a lot of flashbacks as well. There weren't any flashbacks in the original, but I began thinking to myself, like, the person in this film who ends their own life, which isn't a spoiler, it happens before the film even starts. It's like what sets the stage for it. In the original version, that character, Emma, never had a voice of her own in the story. It was all these other characters interpreting her words and putting their own spin on how she felt. With this, I thought it would be a good idea to add flashbacks that all take place from Emma's perspective, so that we can actually see the perspective of the person that everybody else is making this fuss about, because that's something a lot of stories about suicide and depression just don't do. It always focuses only on the perspective of the people who survive rather than the person who actually passed. So I thought it was very important to include all of those new parts of the story that take place from Emma's perspective, so we can hear big portions of the story from in her voice, in her own words, which is why we also added the letters into this version as well.
How has this production impacted your life?
I kind of say this about every production I ever do, but it genuinely is a dream come true. This is definitely the most large-scale film that I've done, because all my film stuff, I haven't been in like other people's films. I've only ever done my films, because I have a very like do-it-yourself mentality as far as my film career goes. The film I did before this, a short film called Monotony, only had a lead cast of only 2 people, whereas this one has a lead cast of 6 people. So it's a big step up in responsibility and also managing a set well and communicating with everybody well. So as far as how it's impacted my life, it's made me, I think, better equipped, and this experience has better equipped me to handle more daunting film projects in the future. On an emotional level, I feel like this is the first time that this story, which means so much to me, has actually been done justice. And I think that comes from having done 2 years of film school and doing college theater and things like that. Having that added education and experience that I didn't have the first time I adapted this story, I think really benefited the film as a narrative and as a piece of art. And when I watched the final cut of it, I just sat back and I was like, finally, like, this is how I've always envisioned this story to be, and we actually did it. And that was so cool. Just honestly life-changing, because it's also such a complicated and complex story. Not to like pat myself on the back, but I only mean it in the sense of like there's so many characters, and we tried to give all of them an equal amount of time to shine and be fleshed out. So
you're pretty young to be writing and directing stories this ambitious. How do you feel about that? What's your process like?
I have been making movies technically ever since I was like 9 years old. Just like in iMovie on an iPod Touch. Like, I've always been fascinated by movies. I've always loved movies. And so, like, from my perspective, I've already been, like, honing the craft for so long that I don't interpret myself as, like, a young filmmaker. I just interpret myself as a filmmaker. You know, I'm 20 years old. I'm an adult. I'm going on 21. And I think a lot of it just comes from not wanting to wait. Like, there's so many people in my life who pressure me to wait. Like, oh, Xavier, just wait a little bit until you have, like, blah, 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 and then maybe start doing this stuff. Wait until you have this and this and this, and then maybe you can do it. I hate that because I also, like, I honestly don't exactly know how to describe it, but it's just this art form is what drives, like, so much of what I do and so much of what I feel. It's what got me through my childhood. It's the reason I'm here talking to you today, and I'm just so eager and I'm so passionate about it. I could never see a universe, if the multiverse is real, there is no universe out there where I am not working as hard as I am on my film career at this age. Waiting was never an option for me. It's everything to me, and nothing's gonna stop me from doing that. I think it's also important to build up a impressive portfolio when you're very young because, again, it may sound ignorant and a bit self-righteous, but I'm just tired of waiting. And so I decided I'm not going to wait for permission to make the things I want to make. I'm just going to make them. And here we are.
Do you have a message for any other young artists out there?
Sort of going off what I just said, don't wait for other people's permission to make the things that you want to make. I think this is one of the biggest things I've learned, not only in my experience in theater, but also film and going to film school. Learned a lot there. You cannot rely on the approval of others to make your art. If you are truly that passionate about it and truly that driven about it, you just need to make it. Who cares if you don't have all the resources you would need to make it as pitch perfect as you possibly could? You're never going to be proud of anything you make if that's the mindset you do it with. If that's the bar that you set for yourself on every project, you're never going to get to where you want to be. You just have to make it as good as you can with what you have. And then also another piece of advice to go alongside that, don't stop creating. Just keep creating one project after the other, because if you stop creating, at least in my experience, it puts me in a very depressive low. The creative juices stop flowing, and I start losing motivation in things. I start losing faith in things, and stop losing faith in myself. You just have to keep creating. Don't look at it from a perspective of like, oh, like every project I make has to be better than the last project I made. No, treat every project as if it exists in a vacuum. Devote all of your time and energy to a single project at a time, rather than telling yourself, I have to make this better than the last one. No, because if you go in with that mentality, it's not going to be better than the last one. You just have to treat each project with the same level of love and dedication and care as you did your previous projects. And that's truly how you will improve as an artist. And so I think those two things there are definitely like some of the most important advice I think that I could give to other artists my age or artists younger than me who are really passionate about it, who want to get into this industry.
Why should people watch this film?
People should watch this film because everyone who worked on it, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but like everyone who worked on it truly gave it their all. Like, I knew that the people I picked for this were talented people. I wouldn't have picked them if they weren't. But like, genuinely, every single person in this cast specifically blew me away with this film. I knew they could all act, and I knew that they were all good at what they do, but this film didn't necessarily like fit one-to-one with any role that any of these people had done previously. And so I was a little nervous, like, I know this person's talented, but are they going to be able to bring it when it comes to this story specifically? And all my worries went out the door. Honestly, after the first day we filmed in the shed, I was like, I'm not anxious about this at all anymore. They all just did such a good job, and they're all also very passionate about it. So I think the biggest reason you should see this film is just to support local artists and actors and actresses who aren't part of the union, who don't have benefits like that. We're small timers. We are indie in every sense of the word, and we have very little to work with, but we try to do the best with what we have. And I think especially in today's film market and just film landscape and environment in general, it's especially important right now to support young independent artists who have very little to work with, so that they can bring their stories that aren't influenced by a $25 million offer from a studio, and that aren't being infested with the sausage fingers of whoever the CEOs are of any various big, like, multi-billion-dollar film company, you know? Like, everyone who worked on this film, myself included, did it just for the love of the game. None of us got paid. Every ounce of the budget went into equipment and costumes and special effects to make the film look as good as possible, because we also deeply care about the audience's experience with this film. And so honestly, all of that combined into one, I think, is why people should come and see this film. And I'm not even saying, like, I know I'm the writer and director, I'm not even saying to come and see it for me, but like the people who worked on this with me are some of the most talented I've ever met, and I think they deserve the biggest crowd possible, and I really, really would love for them to have that, because they deserve a standing ovation for everything they accomplished with this film. And yeah, I just really hope that people come out and support these incredible artists who are just working with what they have and making the best thing they possibly can. So, yeah.